Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're inviting you to step right into, well, a 16th century masterpiece. And at first glance, you might think, okay, a grand portrait, maybe a bit formal,
Hmm.
but give it a second look. Let your eyes wander a bit. You'll quickly see it's more like a complex puzzle. It's absolutely packed with hidden messages, some really startling visual tricks, and profound philosophical questions that still feel relevant today.
Absolutely. Get ready for a real journey into the heart of the Northern Renaissance.
We're talking about Hans Holbein the Younger's The Ambassadors.
Yeah.
It's an iconic work, painted way back in 1533.
That's right. It's housed in the National Gallery in London now, and if you've ever had the chance to stand in front of it, you know exactly what we mean about that immediate visual impact.
Oh, definitely.
You've got these two distinguished-looking men dressed, impeccably in all their finery, and they're surrounded by this fascinating array of objects, all rendered with just incredible detail.
In that background.
Yes, framed by those rich, heavy velvet curtains. It seems like, a straightforward picture of status of worldly success. But it just invites, no, it really demands a much closer look, a more thoughtful inspection. It's got layers.
That's a perfect way to put it. Layers.
Hmm.
And that's exactly our mission today with this deep dive. We want to peel back those layers. We'll look at the ambassadors not just as, a visually stunning piece of art, which it absolutely is, but also as a historical document, a kind of philosophical statement, and a unique window into the intellectual and political turmoil of its time.
It was a very turbulent time.
So our goal here is to pull out the most important bits of knowledge from the sources about this painting, helping you understand why it's still so significant. We'll explore Holbein's incredible technical skill, the really startling symbolism he uses so cleverly, and the historical context that makes the ambassadors just so unique and, honestly, endlessly fascinating.
It's one of those paintings that really does keep on giving, isn't it? You can look at it again and again and find something new.
Exactly. So where should we start? Maybe with the artist himself.
Sounds good. Let's unpack Hans Holbein the Younger and his absolutely crucial role in art history. Holbein was born in Augsburg, Germany, around 1497, give or take.
Okay.
And he really emerged as a central, incredibly influential figure in the Northern European Renaissance. His career path is pretty interesting. He trained with his father, who was also a painter, which wasn't uncommon.
Right.
But then he eventually made his way to England. And by the 1530s, so right when this painting was made, he had basically established himself as the chief portraitist to the Tudor court.
Working for Henry VIII himself.
Yes, serving King Henry VIII directly. And this wasn't just, any old job. It put him right in the thick of it, in contact with the most important political figures of the day. It allowed him to immortalize them, to capture the very essence of the court itself. He really had a unique view of the massive changes sweeping through England at that exact moment.
And his approach to art, you used the word revolutionary earlier, and I think that's spot on. It wasn't just incremental change he brought.
Yeah. No, definitely not. He truly set himself apart. His attention to detail, for one thing, was just legendary. That striking realism he achieved. Groundbreaking for the time.
You can almost count the threads sometimes.
Almost. And his masterful use of symbolism, often quite subtle, but always powerful, it was unparalleled. He wasn't just painting what someone looked like on the surface.
Yeah.
He was capturing a kind of psychological depth, an inner world that was really rare back then. When you look at his portraits, you don't just see a face, you get a sense of the person's character, their status, sure, but also maybe their mood, their thoughts.
He basically redefined what a portrait could be, didn't he? Pushing it beyond just likeness into exploring the nuances of being human.
Precisely. And it's fascinating how his work perfectly highlights the differences between the Northern Renaissance and what was happening down in Italy.
Okay, talk about that distinction.
Well, the Italian Renaissance, you think Michelangelo, Raphael, they were often focused on classical ideals, big grand narratives, mythological scenes, very monumental forms.
Right, the high Renaissance ideals.
Exactly. But the Northern Renaissance, especially in places like the Netherlands, Germany, where Holbein came from, it had a different flavor. Artists like Holbein, they zeroed in on intricate detail, a really profound psychological realism, and this pervasive use of symbolism, often hidden within everyday objects or scenes.
Not necessarily grand allegories, but meaning embedded in the ordinary.
Exactly. Holbein's skill in rendering, say, facial expressions that feel truly alive, Or the textures of fabric you mentioned, feeling the velvet or silk, that's spot on, and the subtle way light and shadow play across surfaces. That's all characteristic of this northern tradition.
It makes his subjects feel incredibly present, almost tangible, like they could just step out of the painting.
Right, it was a move towards capturing the world as it really looked, but always infused with these deeper layers of meaning.
Which brings us neatly to the context, because you can't really get the ambassadors without understanding what Europe was like in 1533.
Absolutely not. It was anything but peaceful. It was a world in rapid flux, massive upheaval, especially religiously and politically. You can almost feel that tension in the painting itself when you know what was going on.
So what were the main tremors?
Well, 1533 is right in the thick of the Protestant Reformation, and its impact was quite literally shaking the foundations of European society. The sources really emphasize this.
Okay.
You had these deep, often violent tensions between the established Catholic Church, which had dominated for centuries, and these new burgeoning Protestant movements spreading across the continent. Luther, Calvin, others.
This wasn't just theological debate.
Oh, no, far from it. It led to intense religious conflict, political maneuvering, huge social unrest. It was redefining national identities, challenging the power of monarchs, breaking apart the religious unity of Christendom that had existed for so long.
A dangerous time to have strong opinions.
Extremely. What you believed could literally mean life or death. It affected everything.
And England, where Holbein was painting this picture, was having its own specific brand of turmoil, right?
Absolutely. England was basically ground zero for its own massive upheaval, which amplified all of those broader European tensions. 1533 was the exact moment King Henry VIII made his dramatic and very controversial break from the Catholic Church.
The whole Anne Boleyn situation.
Precisely. It was the year he married Anne Boleyn, which, caused a massive scandal across Europe. And that marriage directly led to him establishing the Church of England, declaring himself its supreme head.
A huge power grab, essentially.
And a moment of profound, unprecedented transformation for England. It had religious, political, social consequences that echoed for centuries. It completely reshaped English identity and its place in the world.
So what does this all mean for Holbein and the ambassadors?
It's critical context. He's creating this incredibly detailed, thoughtful painting in an atmosphere just saturated with religious arguments, radical political changes, uncertainty. The sources strongly suggest the painting subtly reflects this whole complex situation.
Oh.
Well, it seems to prompt questions, doesn't it? About where individuals stood, where society stood on matters of faith, power, even mortality, especially when the old certainties were just crumbling away. It becomes this multi-layered story about the challenges people face then.
And our job here is just to show how those historical forces might be reflected in the art.
Exactly. We're just presenting how these powerful dynamics seem to be woven into the painting itself based on the sources. We're not taking sides on Henry VIII or the Reformation, obviously, but appreciating how Holbein captured the very feel of such a pivotal, tumultuous time.
Okay, so we've set the scene. The artist, his style, the turbulent times. Let's zoom in on the two main figures in the painting. They really anchor everything.
They do. These aren't just random portraits. They feel very symbolic, almost allegorical. Each seems to embody a key aspect of the Renaissance man, and putting them together tells a story.
So on the left.
On the left, we have Jean de Dinteville. He was the French ambassador to England at the time, a man of significant worldly status, and Holbein places him very prominently on the left.
And his clothes really stand out.
Don't they just? Holbein depicts him in really luxurious, incredibly detailed, almost ostentatious clothing. Look at the richness of that brown tunic. It's lined with fur and those huge silk sleeves.
Very fashionable, I imagine.
Top of the line. And that chain he's wearing, the Order of St. Michael, it's rendered so meticulously. It speaks volumes about his high status, his connection to the French king. This isn't just clothing. It's Holbein deliberately using it to symbolize worldly status, wealth, earthly power, influence.
And his pose. He looks quite confident.
Very. He's portrayed as young, self-assured, almost commanding. He really embodies the strength and influence of the secular world. He's a man of action, deeply involved in politics, diplomacy, the material world.
Okay, then contrasting him on his right, we have the other figure.
That's Georges the Self, a very different character. He was a distinguished clergyman, the Bishop of Lavore, though also known as Archbishop of Lyon, and a respected scholar and academic.
And his clothing reflects that difference.
Absolutely. It's noticeably simpler compared to Dinteville's finery. He wears a plain dark cassock. It immediately signals a different focus. spiritual, intellectual, moral values, rather than showing off worldly possessions.
So he represents the spiritual, intellectual side of things.
Exactly. He represents the authority of the spiritual world, the importance of contemplation, of higher learning. It's a really stark contrast to Dinteville's active, worldly role. A fascinating pairing.
And Holbein putting them together like this, it feels intentional.
Oh, incredibly intentional. It's brilliant, really. He brings these two contrasting figures, these two different paths in life, these different kinds of authority together in one frame.
What does that contrast signify, do you think?
Well, they seem to embody that inherent tension between worldly power and spiritual authority, the secular versus the sacred. And remember, this is the exact tension the Reformation was tearing apart at the seams.
Right, the whole conflict over where ultimate authority lay.
Precisely. So their presence together becomes this powerful visual commentary on the religious, political, social structures of the 16th century. They represent distinct paths, sure, but they're unified in the painting, sharing that space, linked by the table between them. It hints at how complex and interwoven power, belief, and knowledge really were back then.
It's like a silent dialogue happening right there.
A very powerful one, yes.
And the way Holbein actually structured the painting, the canvas itself, that also feels very carefully thought out. It's not just a random background.
Not at all. It's as deliberate as everything else. It's like a stage set, carefully constructed to enhance the meaning.
How so? What are the key compositional elements?
Well, first, it's a full-length portrait, which was quite grand and impressive for the time. It really commands your attention. And the whole scene is framed by those heavy red velvet curtains in the background.
Which creates a kind of enclosed feeling.
Exactly. It feels like a closed and restricted space, almost like a private room or a stage. And that's intentional. By closing off the background like that, Holbein forces your eye directly onto the two men and, crucially, onto all those objects laid out on the table between them.
Draws you right in.
It does. It signals that every single detail within this confined yet incredibly rich world is important. Nothing is accidental.
And that precision, that careful arrangement, it feels very Renaissance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There is a clear use of linear perspective, you can see the lines converging, and an overall sense of balance and order in the composition. This perfectly reflects the Renaissance emphasis on mathematical harmony, rational design, and art.
They were obsessed with finding the mathematical rules underlying everything.
They really were, and you see that here in the orderly arrangement, the sense of calm logic. It's almost like a perfectly balanced equation visually.
Almost perfect.
Yeah.
Because then Holbein does something completely unexpected.
Right. He throws in this incredible curveball. The most striking and, frankly, revolutionary compositional feature is that weird, distorted, elongated shape down on the floor right in the foreground.
Their skull?
The anamorphic skull. It completely breaks the rules of classical perspective that govern the rest of the painting. You can only recognize it as a skull if you view it from a very specific, sharp angle, usually down low on the right.
Which immediately makes you ask, why? Why would Holbein, this master of realism and order, disrupt his own perfect scene with something so jarring and distorted?
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. It's pure genius and a testament to how daring he was.
And this brings us right into the whole memento mori aspect.
Yeah.
Embodied by that absolutely incredible anamorphic skull. It's probably the most talked about part of the painting.
And for good reason. It's not just a symbol. It's an interactive experience almost.
Explain the anamorphic technique itself. How does it work?
Okay, so anamorphic projection is this clever artistic technique where an image looks completely distorted, like a weird smear from a normal viewpoint.
Right, like that shape on the floor.
Exactly. But if you view it from a particular, very acute angle, or sometimes people used special mirrors or lenses, though not needed here, the distortion corrects itself, and the hidden image snaps into focus.
So how would someone in the 16th century have seen it?
Well, the idea is you'd be expected to move around the painting. Imagine you're there in the gallery admiring all the detail, the rich colors, the impressive figures, the scientific instruments. You're taking in all this worldly splendor. And then maybe as you walk past, moving towards the right side of the painting, perhaps on your way out, this strange elongated smudge on the floor suddenly, almost shockingly, resolves itself. It becomes the unmistakable image of a human skull.
Wow. So it's a hidden reveal.
Exactly. It's a brilliant artistic game, an intellectual puzzle, and it completely shifts your perception of the whole painting in an instant. You go from admiring worldly success to confronting stark mortality.
That delayed shock must be incredibly powerful. And the symbolism, memento mori.
Yes, Latin for remember you must die. That's a classic theme. Reminding viewers of mortality, the inevitability of death, was common in Renaissance art, often through symbols like skulls or hourglasses.
But not usually hidden like this.
Rarely presented with such a startling, clever, almost aggressive visual trick. Holbein's method makes it uniquely impactful. The purpose is clear: to powerfully remind you that all this earthly life, power, wealth, knowledge, it's all fleeting. It's ultimately futile in the face of death. It forces that confrontation.
And he connects it directly to the two men in the painting.
Absolutely. That's where the genius lies. He uses this stark symbol placed right at their feet almost to emphasize that despite their power, their status, their youth, their obvious intelligence, death is the great equalizer. It awaits everyone.
It creates a kind of dialogue within the painting itself.
A profound philosophical dialogue, yes. A silent but incredibly loud conversation between life and death, between earthly power that seems so solid and the undeniable reality of our mortality. This hidden skull adds immense philosophical weight. It directly invites you, the viewer, to think about your own life, your own end, in a way a straightforward skull might not.
It's more of a jolt than a gentle reminder.
Exactly. It forces a moment of real introspection.
Great, so beyond the figures in that mind-bending skull, let's look closely at the objects on that two-tiered table. They're clearly not just decoration.
No, far from it. They form this carefully chosen intellectual landscape. Each item tells part of the story, and together they paint this picture of what mattered in terms of knowledge and skill in the 16th century. It's like a visual encyclopedia of the era's pursuits.
So let's break it down. What do we see? Books, obviously.
Yes, books on both shelves. And not just any books. On the upper shelf, you have instruments related to the heavens, a celestial globe, a sundial, other astronomical tools. On the lower shelf, things related more to earthly matters, a terrestrial globe, an arithmetic book, a hymn book, musical instruments.
So bridging faith and reason, heaven and earth.
Precisely. It represents that core Renaissance pursuit of knowledge in all its forms. The arithmetic book, for example, points to the growing importance of mathematics, measurement, empirical understanding. The hymn book, likely Lutheran judging by the specific hymns shown, points directly to the religious debates of the Reformation, the focus on scripture.
So covering both spiritual and scientific understanding.
Right. Essential for the well-rounded Renaissance person.
And the musical instruments. I see a lute, some flutes.
Yes. A lute, flutes, or recorders in a case. Their symbolism is layered. On one level, they represent art, harmony. Order music was often linked to the divine harmony of the cosmos in Renaissance thinking, a metaphor for a perfectly ordered world.
But there's always a but with Holbein, isn't there?
There often is. Look closely at the lute on the lower shelf. One of its strings is broken.
Ah, I see it now. That can't be accidental.
Definitely not. It's widely interpreted as a symbol of discord, of disharmony. Given the context of 1533, it almost certainly hints at the religious schism, the breaking of Christian unity caused by the Reformation. Henry VIII's break from Rome was a huge rupture in the supposed harmony of Christendom.
So that single broken string speaks volumes about the turmoil of the time.
It really does. It suggests that despite the appearance of order and learning, things are not harmonious. There's tension, fragmentation.
Okay, what else? The globes are quite prominent.
Yes, the terrestrial and celestial globes on the top shelf. They symbolize the incredible explosion of knowledge about the world happening. Then an age of exploration, geographical discoveries, new maps.
And advances in astronomy, too.
Exactly. Challenging older ideas about the cosmos. They reflect that rapidly expanding worldview, the excitement of discovery, and a deeper attempt to understand both the Earth and humanity's place in the universe. The terrestrial globe even shows specific, fairly recent discoveries in South America.
Wow, so very up to date.
Very. And the celestial globe points to the mapping of the heavens, understanding the cosmos.
And I see some technical tools as well.
Yeah.
A compass, a ruler.
Yes, tools of geometry, mathematics, rational thought. Their inclusion is important because it highlights how intertwined art and science were in the Renaissance. They weren't seen as separate things.
Artists needed to understand perspective, anatomy.
Precisely. So these tools represent human ingenuity, the power of measurement, the rational organization of the world. It shows the era's fascination with empirical methods, the belief that you could measure and understand the world through reason.
So taken together, what's the message of all these objects?
Well, they're definitely not just props. They create this incredibly rich intellectual atmosphere. They reflect the ideal of the Renaissance man, someone deeply engaged with the material world and the cosmos, with science and faith, with art and mathematics. This whole tableau provides a deep intellectual and historical backdrop for the two ambassadors themselves, summing up the knowledge and anxieties of 1533.
Looking at all this detail, you just have to marvel at Holbein's skill. The technical ability on display is just astonishing.
It really is unparalleled for his time. His skill in rendering textures is incredible. You mentioned the velvet earlier. You can almost feel the different fabrics, the sheen on silk, the weight of the velvet, the softness of the fur trim on Dinteville's tunic.
And the faces, they feel so real.
They do. He captures their individual expressions with such psychological depth, they feel like real people with thoughts and feelings. And his use of light and shadow, his ability to render every little material detail with such precision, it creates this incredibly vivid, convincing reality. Every fold, every reflection on metal, it's all there with almost photographic accuracy.
Let's talk about that light and shadow chiaroscuro, right?
Right. He uses light masterfully. It highlights the faces, drawing your eye to their expressions, revealing their character, but it also gives all the objects on the table this amazing three-dimensional quality. They look solid, tangible, like you could reach out and touch them.
Where did the light seem to come from?
It seems to be coming from an unseen source high up on the left, and it casts these very precise shadows, which helps create depth and adds to that dramatic, almost theatrical feeling. It pulls you into their space.
And yet, despite the drama and the hidden skull, there's still a sense of order in the overall composition.
Yes, there's a remarkable sense of balance and symmetry overall. The figures and objects are arranged within this precise, almost mathematical framework. It reflects that Renaissance ideal of harmony and proportion.
Which makes the disruptions, the broken string, the distorted skull, even more impactful.
Exactly. He establishes the order, demonstrates his mastery of it, and then he deliberately disrupts it for profound effect.
Which brings us back to the skull. But thinking about it purely technically, it's not just a symbol, it's a technical feat.
Absolutely. It's a stunning demonstration of Holbein's incredibly advanced understanding of perspective and optics. He knew how to manipulate visual perception, including, it wasn't just symbolic, it showcased the kind of innovative, experimental things artists were doing then. He was pushing the boundaries, playing with the viewer.
He knew the rules so well, he knew exactly how to break them.
Perfectly put. He mastered the rules just so he could subvert them for maximum intellectual and emotional impact.
So beyond the amazing technique, the ambassadors, is also deeply embedded in the philosophical ideas floating around Europe in the 1530s.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real intellectual canvas reflecting the major currents of thought.
Like humanism, for instance. That was huge then.
Yes, humanism was really flourishing around 1533. And it wasn't just about putting humans at the center. It involved looking back to classical Greece and Rome for wisdom, championing reason, advocating for a broad education, the Renaissance man ideal.
Celebrating human potential.
Exactly. Celebrating achievement in art, science, politics, philosophy, believing humans had this unique capacity for greatness. But, and this is crucial, humanists were also intensely aware of how short life is, the limits of human power.
That duality again.
Yes. And the Ambassadors captures that perfectly. It celebrates the power, the status, the knowledge of these two men through their depiction and the objects around them. But then, bam, the skull reminds you. It's all temporary. Death comes for everyone. Holbein nails that paradox.
And Reformation echoes are impossible to miss too, right?
Impossible. The very presence of these two specific figures, Dinteville, the worldly diplomat, and de Saffitte, the spiritual cleric, embodies the tensions and questions the Reformation was throwing up.
Secular versus religious authority.
Exactly. The Reformation was challenging the traditional authority of the church, emphasizing individual interpretation of Scripture, personal faith. The painting visually represents this ongoing debate. Where does authority truly lie? With the church, with the state, with the individual conscience. It captures that societal argument without explicitly taking a side.
Which leads to a really important point about art back then.
Yes. For Holbein and his contemporaries, art wasn't just decoration. It wasn't just about making pretty pictures. It was a powerful way to comment on philosophy, politics, religion. It was a medium for complex ideas, for debate, for making profound statements about life and the world. The Ambassadors is a perfect example. It's a layered narrative. You have to read it, decode it, as much as just look at it.
Like a visual essay.
Precisely. It demands interpretation, invites dialogue.
So thinking about it that way, the painting really goes beyond just being portraits of Dinterville and de Self.
Oh, absolutely. It becomes this complex reflection of the diplomatic ties between England and France during a really tense period. It comments on social class, the hierarchy of power in that era, but even more broadly, it's a profound meditation on human existence itself, ambition, knowledge, mortality. Those themes are universal.
And the clothes reinforce that. We
Yeah,
touched on it earlier.
definitely. Dinterville's opulent outfit screams worldly power, status, material success. It's a symbol of everything that meant being powerful in the secular realm at that time. The rich fabrics, the gold chain, it's all there.
While de Selve's simpler clothes suggest a different kind of power.
Exactly. His subdued garments signify spiritual, intellectual, moral authority, a power derived from piety and learning, not wealth. But Holbein puts them together, sharing that table laden with objects representing both spheres. It underscores how intertwined the worldly and the spiritual were, even if they were sometimes in conflict. They coexist in the same complex reality.
And then underpinning it all, we come back one last time to the skull.
The ultimate statement, it's the final word, in a way. The punchline that recontextualizes everything you've just admired. Despite all the power, the status, the incredible knowledge represented by the men and the objects, the globes, the instruments, the fine clothes, that skull is the unavoidable truth.
It reminds us it's all temporary.
Utterly temporary, ultimately insignificant in the face of death. It really drives home the painting's core message about the limits of human ambition, the impermanence of everything we build and strive for. It grounds all that human achievement in the stark reality of our finite lives.
So let's try and synthesize this deep dive. How would you sum up the ambassadors?
Well, it's undeniably a monumental masterpiece, defined by, I'd say, three key things. Holbein's exceptional technical skill, its incredibly rich symbolic language, and its profound grasp of the 16th century intellectual and historical landscape.
And through its figures and objects.
It just lays bare the complexities of human nature, our ambition, our knowledge, our status, alongside the ever-present, unavoidable reality of death. It captures a specific moment in history, yes, but also something timeless about the human condition.
It also seems to blend different artistic traditions.
Yes, skillfully. It blends that human-centered philosophy of Renaissance humanism, the celebration of human intellect and achievement, with the much more sobering Venetist tradition.
The tradition emphasizing that earthly things are fleeting, worthless in the end.
Exactly. Vanitas vanitatum, vanity of vanities. So the painting performs this delicate yet profound dance between celebrating human greatness and reminding us of its ultimate futility. It captures the dual nature of existence.
And that's why it still speaks to us today.
I think so. Its timeless message really invites you, the listener, to think about its relevance now. It makes us consider how fleeting our own lives are and that constant interplay between knowledge, faith, power, and art in our own experience. It's so much more than just a portrait. It's this enduring story about being human, reflecting the spirit of a fascinating age, but also resonating across the centuries.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you to take away from this deep dive. In our age, today, an age often obsessed with information, with innovation, constant accumulation, our own digital globes, our endless pursuit of knowledge and status, Holbein's The Ambassador seems to ask us to confront a really fundamental truth. How do we, living now, balance our own worldly ambitions, our intellectual pursuits, with that inescapable reality of our own mortality? Just like those two men, surrounded by all the symbols of their power and knowledge, were forced to confront theirs through that hidden skull.
It's a powerful question to leave with, and we really do encourage you, if you can, look up the ambassadors online, zoom right in on those details we've talked about. Or, even better, if you ever get the chance to be in London, go to the National Gallery.
Definitely.
Stand in front of it, move around, find that sweet spot where the skull snaps into focus. Experience it for yourself. It's truly an experience like no other, and it might just make you think differently about, well, life, death, and the power of art.